Okay, we're here in the Radisson Hotel in Cancun, and I'm here with Francesco Martone, who is with the Forest Peoples Program. Francesco, can you tell us a little bit about the Forest Peoples Program and your work here in Cancun?
Sure. Forest Peoples Program is a UK-based NGO working on forest people's rights and indigenous people's rights. Much of the work is focused on strengthening the capacity and empowering communities by providing them with all the necessary information and data about projects and programs and all with the rights and the way they can reclaim the rights vis-a-vis development projects that are supported by national, local governments and international organizations. Some of the work is focused on climate change and on working with communities in selected tropical forest countries to share information and about how to reclaim rights and how to ensure the respect of indigenous people's rights specifically in the RED projects and programs. Some other work is being carried out on the issue of biodiversity and recognition of traditional knowledge and the right to access to benefit sharing. Then there is a whole section of work that is carried out through international litigation to set the precedents on issues like free, prior, and informed consent, or to support communities that are seeking the recognition of the land claims. My work mostly is focused on international level work, negotiations on RED and international processes. So I've been following the UN negotiations since Poznan. So this is my second year of chasing after this bandwagon. But I also work on other RED international processes such as the UN RED and the World Bank, FCPF, and FIP.
Francesco, can you tell us, give a overview of what RED is, and because it's such a complicated issue here in Cancun now, and especially for indigenous peoples, why it is important that they understand what is in RED, although it hasn't been fleshed out yet.
Well, to understand RED, I think you have to...
Let's give all these acronyms. It's hard
Yes,
for
exactly.
a layperson to understand all this jargon. So, yes. RED is REDD, and it stands for Reduction of Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation. And it's a mechanism to give incentives to people or nations that have a lot of rainforests for their ecological services to not to cut down so that we don't increase our greenhouse gas. Is that pretty close?
It is pretty close, and actually the interesting thing is that this discussion dates back to 1992 when at the Rio Convention of the UN on Sustainable Development and Environment, the Rio Eco 92, there was an attempt to draft and finalize a forest convention. And the forest convention was the main focus and the main goal was basically to provide financial incentives to tropical forest countries not to deforest, so that that was called the green lung of the planet would be kept intact, and that would facilitate balancing emissions of carbon.
Yeah, I think an important statistic is that fossil fuels account for over 50% of the carbon emissions, but deforestations counts for about 17%, I've heard. Is that pretty correct?
Yeah, pretty much so. So, and but you know, with RED, the process changes. Right before, the idea was just to provide money to governments not to deforest, and this is a part of what RED is all about. Now, the proponents of RED think and try to argue that forests are by themselves factories that can produce money. They don't need to pillage the resources and sell them all over the world. You can keep the forest standing so that it can generate money. And this is the whole concept of carbon trading and carbon. You have carbon offsets, where the forest stands still and can absorb carbon produced mostly in the global north, the minority world, say, and then you have the forest standing that can generate money by the issuance of carbon credits. And this is a significant change that in fact is also, philosophically speaking, is transforming forest into an asset.
So we're commodifying
Absolutely.
forests, making it into something traders on Wall Street can deal with
Yes.
it and sell to polluting countries so that they can continue polluting while offsetting their carbon emissions by buying these offsets. Is that,
Yes.
as I understand it?
Yes, and it is a strong incentive for oil-dependent countries and companies to distance themselves from the fossil fuel dependency. And why are these important for indigenous peoples? Well, I think that one key issue here is that any international decision-making process, and any program or project that might impact on indigenous people's rights has to be subject to some obligations. The obligation to consult and to engage and to provide tools to ensure the proper and full participation of indigenous peoples. And this is about REDD, but about all the climate change policies and actions we are discussing here.
They need to be at the table because these decisions that are being made impact their communities. Is that?
Yes, actually, and the interesting thing is that, the experience on REDD at the country level this far shows a fragmented situation. Whereas you have some countries where governments are going at full steam and they're not engaging indigenous peoples, and this is a serious issue that has to be addressed, mostly strengthening and empowering communities to reclaim their own political space. In other cases, like in Paraguay or Indonesia, you see that the intention of the governments to go ahead with REDD, so seeking international funding, is actually internationalizing that conflict with indigenous peoples, and is providing them with a brighter space to reclaim their rights. So, like for Indonesia, the biggest network of indigenous peoples, AMAN, that represents more than 10 million indigenous peoples, after Indonesia showed interest to go ahead to seek support from the World Bank and the UN REDD, the two main multilateral proponents and supporters of REDD, the government had to open up, had to start discussing with indigenous peoples about a new indigenous peoples' rights law, and about engaging them in consultative bodies. So they are, for many of them, this is a threat for sure, because it might imply, given certain conditions, even a land grabbing. But at the same
They
time,
could be kicked off
they could be
their
kicked off their
territories.
or they could even be forced to abandon their traditional livelihoods. One of the big topics on REDD is the so-called identification of the drivers of deforestation. So you need to understand in some preliminary studies what are the main causes that are causing deforestation and degradation. And in many cases, especially in countries where logging industries or mining industries are predominant, you see that those are not being seen as the main drivers, while, for instance, traditional practices, shifting agriculture, or other traditional management systems of the forest are seen as the drivers. So they're penalized, and indigenous peoples would be then asked to be educated and abandon their traditional lifestyle and turn themselves into eco-entrepreneur or carbon traders.